Hey everybody, it's Charlie from Daily Motor. And any of you watching who are kind of familiar with automotive reviews in general, you might know that auto manufacturers often host these first drive events where they invite a lot of journalists out and allow them all to drive a vehicle for a little bit of time and kind of get that first exposure to it. They're curated routes and we're kind of wined and dined, and oftentimes it results in a fairly favorable review of the vehicles because it's basic psychology. And also we don't get to spend a whole lot of time in it and experience it in kind of a normal real world situation. But then we often get to spend a week with the cars later on. So that's what happened with me with the Chevy Trax. I got to attend the launch event. It was cool, it was fun. Got to see them all in their fun colors and the different trims and drive them around a little bit. I enjoyed it. It was a good experience with the Trax. And now, after having the Trax for a week, it's still good. It is still good. It's just, the honeymoon is a little bit over, I suppose. At the end of the day, this is still a $26,000 car, and it's got $26,000 car attributes. But I do still think Chevy did a really good job with it as an entry-level vehicle. And I think there's a lot to like about it, but I don't think it's by and far the best car in this entry-level subcompact class. So let's take a little look around it. Let's take it for a drive. We'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons, and yeah, let's try to get to the bottom of the new Trax. I should also say that we've shot a lot of videos on it. I've got a sound system review. This one's got the 6-speaker sound system, a breakdown in the infotainment system. Importantly, the highway fuel economy test. I'll just spoil it for you here right now. We got 33 mpg, which not super fantastic for a car this size and this price point. But I do have to say, the Trax looks really good here for 2024. Very, very different than the previous generation Trax. Long, swooping roofline and styling. Kind of looks Subaru-y, I dare say. Kind of got that like a shrunken Outback sort of look to it. Some good styling elements, although it only comes in front-wheel drive. You would think, by being a crossover and kind of having the approach and departure angles and ground clearance that it does, you might think that it's all-wheel drive, but it isn't. Front-wheel drive only. You got to get a Chevy Trailblazer if you want all-wheel drive. Interestingly, for some of you who might be curious, I noticed we do have Continental Pro Contact TX tires on here. So despite this being a budget car, we've got some good rubber. I'm happy to see that. No power liftgate. I'm okay with that. It opens right up. We see a very low load surface. Happy to see that. There is a little bit of a lip to get in here, but we've got, let's see, one cargo area over there and a spare tire. Also happy to see that with so many brands getting rid of spare tires. How about the seat folding action? Quick side note, capless fuel filler, like to see that. Door doesn't open super wide, so if you're considering getting car seats in or out of here, that might not be the best move there. But the seat does fold, even with the driver's seat in a 5'10" position, and fairly flat load surface here. The headrests actually do this little bit of swivel. That kind of helps with the seat folding flat. So I do think that a lot of the things with the Trax are very well thought out. That's kind of been my rub, if I had to come to a conclusion on the car, is yes, it's cheap. Yes, there are places where they cut costs, but the practical aspects of the car and the general feel of it is very well thought out. For example, getting into the back seat, 5'10", fitting no problem. Hey, I have a surprising amount of knee room and a good recline to the seat. I'm actually sitting decently back and very comfortable in here. There are a lot of cars like the Mazda CX-30 that the back seats are practically useless, and that's not the case here in the Trax. They really optimize the space well. No air vents, but we do have USB-C and USB-A ports, as well as a little storage cubby. No flip-down armrest, so I am a little bit surprised by that. But again, that's what I mean. There is some cost cutting in here. This being a 2RS model, we've got some fun styling elements. You can see those red accents around the cabin. We see them in the seats here as well. I like that. It adds a little bit of life to the cabin. Thank goodness it's not gray in here. It drives me nuts when car companies use gray as a cheap interior. One of the first things that actually struck me when I was getting in here is it actually feels pretty decent inside from a material standpoint, because we own a 2023 Chevrolet Bolt EUV Premier. So just about the top level Chevy Bolt you can buy. And things like the turn signal stalk and the door handles, a lot of the parts are shared with the Bolt, but some of them are nicer in here in the Trax than they are in the Bolt. We see this red cross stitching. Again, that adds a little bit of life to the cabin. RS stamped into these two RS headrests. Fun little vents there. And a nice steering wheel too. It's a good size. Nice kind of golf ball material. Usually I'm not a big fan of that golf ball material, but it sort of works for me in here. And some hard plastic that's fun to fidget with. The 2RS model is getting an 11-inch touchscreen. Even though it's a pretty basic infotainment system, it's nice having this big screen when you're using the wireless CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. Let's get that coming up here and you'll see how nice your mapping looks. Physical climate controls, that's big for me, like having that in here. However, the shifter is taking up a good amount of space, so that's a bit unfortunate. The cup holders in the doors will hold a big full-size water bottle, so that was good. These cup holders are a little bit smaller. Here's what I'm talking about with the Android Auto, is you get it coming up and you still got things like your temperature over on the side and your clock, but nice big map, media on the side. It's pretty good for an entry-level car. Not the most center console storage, so again, not a ton of places to put things, but at least you have this little bit here. You could put something like some snacks or drinks or sunglasses or something or other. And then you have your wireless device charger up there. Very important to have wireless device charging if you've got wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. And this one comes with a little sunroof as well. Driving the Trax essentially mirrors the experience inside the cabin and walking around it. Pretty decent driving, honestly. The steering is a good weight. It's not too light, not too heavy. This 1.2 liter inline-3 engine is fine. I really do think it's okay. My two frustrations with the powertrain are, one, and I know I'm gonna get roasted by some people in the comments, I think this should have a CVT. I really do. For those of you unfamiliar, a CVT is a continuously variable transmission, and a lot of people don't like them because they can make loud noises, they can be less reliable than a standard automatic transmission, and some people don't like how they're not very responsive to sporty driving. But for easy, smooth, casual driving, you don't get as much jumpiness and grabbiness and changes in sound when just driving around as you do with something like this 6-speed automatic. I find a lot of situations where I'm slowing down and then getting back on the gas or taking away from stoplights, and this 6-speed automatic isn't very smooth. So yes, I suppose they could just engineer a better standard automatic, but why not use a CVT? So many brands are using CVTs for their entry-level cars. They're fuel efficient, they're simple. I wouldn't be mad at having a CVT in here. And I think a perfect example is that Subaru Crosstrek we just had last week that used a CVT and was totally fine for around town driving. My other frustration with the powertrain comes in the fuel economy. I mean, this is not a very heavy car. It's not a high-tuned engine. Why are we only seeing high 20s around town and low 30s on the highway? I mean, if you're trying to save money by buying a less expensive car, you want to save money at the pump too. And so when there's options out there like Civics and Elantras and Corollas that will get you upward of 40-some miles per gallon, and there's even hybrid versions of crossovers of this size that'll get you upwards in the high 30s. And heck, I mean, that Crosstrek that we drove last week got better fuel economy than this. You got things like this CX-30 from Mazda is going to get better fuel economy than this. So I'm disappointed in the fuel economy numbers on this for sure. But other than those two things, I like the character of this engine. I like the way it drives around town. I think Chevy really did a good job with that. It feels like Chevy's engineers and designers and product planners, they all got together and they actually focused on what makes a car in this segment decent to spend time in and to drive around. And it's like they probably drove prototypes around and like, okay, what are some of the things that are annoying us and what would we do to fix them? There are a lot of times we get into cars and there's head-scratching decisions on, okay, how did this make it through development and not piss the engineers and the drivers and the designers off? Not really the case here in the Trax. I've had it for a week. I've driven it around in a lot of different types of situations. There's been very little that's bothered me in here. In this 2RS trim, you do get an 8-inch digital gauge cluster screen in front of you. I think that one is somewhere where they could have saved a little money. I get that they need some sort of wow factor to get people to pay for these upper level trims. If you get more of a basic one, then you're getting standard analog gauges. But there's a lot of dead space in this screen. Most of it is just a visual exercise. There's not really any useful information that's being added by this being an 8-inch digital screen. For example, my wife's Bolt, that tells us a lot of useful info in its big digital screen. It's telling us optimistic range, pessimistic range, realistic range, how many kilowatts we're either using to propel the vehicle or getting back in regen. There's a lot of data going on the screen in front of you, so it makes sense to have a digital screen there. This one in the Trax is just a little bit of a showpiece. But, I mean, you got to do something to make it feel worthwhile to get a new car here in 2023, I suppose. So I guess I get it. I was reading back through some of the comments on our first drive video. Some people were saying things like, it needs to have ventilated seats and a 360 camera. What part of an entry-level car aren't you understanding? I mean, this is a Chevy, for gosh sakes. This is an inexpensive Chevy. Why do you want them to not only add the potential package cost of something like ventilated seats, but then also have to tack on that cost to all the models because you're adding to the development cost to make sure you build the ventilated seats properly and make them look right and feel right, and then you got to have an extra space for buttons built into it and stuff. It's just, I know that ventilated seats are nice. I know that a 360 camera would be really useful and good, but you got to know your price point, and you got to realize that when companies just throw technology at all of their vehicles, it doesn't always help us as consumers. There's people out there that still want and need just basic new transportation. So I'm glad that Chevy is still providing that here and actually making it a pretty competent and attractive package. Something you should be aware of is that this car is built in Korea. And some of you might be a little disappointed by that because you expect to be buying a Chevrolet and it's not built in America. But I'm actually okay with that because I do think Korean manufacturing has come a really long way. And maybe it's not the same as being built in Japan, but this car is really solid and it feels well built. I think we've come a long way from something like the Aveo from 20 years ago, and being built in Korea, I kind of see as a pro at this point. Another thing you need to consider is, while yes, there are going to be other cars in this class that provide a nicer interior or more features, and they might be priced fairly similarly on paper, but historically speaking, you can go into a Chevy dealer and have, maybe not right away, maybe not while this Trax is brand new, hot off the presses, they're going to be asking full price, but I'm willing to bet within the next 6 months, Chevy is going to have incentives on this vehicle for you to go into the showroom and either lease it for something dirt cheap or get $1,000 on the hood or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if you've got a much better chance at getting approved for financing and getting a lower out-the-door price for this Trax than you would something like a CX-30, like an HR-V, like a Corolla Cross. At the end of the day, there's going to be people who are just going to go out and buy a Trax, and there are people who are never going to buy a Trax. So at least here with this 2024 model, I can tell you that when you see a Trax out on the road, you can know it's a good car. 2024 Trax, a huge improvement to the previous model, and still pretty good to drive around even after a week of real world usage. So thank you all so much for watching. If you do want to see more on the Trax, check the link in the description. Like I said, we've got all those different breakdown videos, and we'll see you on the next one. I'm Charlie from Daily Motor, and as always, entry level on.